Is it even possible for a first-time home buyer to buy a house in Kansas City in the year 2024? Hey, I'm Rachel Kilmer, a licensed real estate agent in both Missouri and Kansas, and I'm joined by Aubrey Washington of Flat Branch Home Loans here today to break down the cost of buying a house and how one can accomplish it. I know it feels overwhelming. Interest rates are sky high. There's no inventory. We've heard it all. But I promise you, real people are buying houses every day, and we're here to explain to you how to get there, how to make it as painless as possible, and ways to make the process go a little more smoothly. Let's jump right in. So the first thing a lot of people ask me when they're thinking about buying a house is how much money do I need? How much cash do I need to have saved up? And I think that a lot of times it's hard to just like put numbers to it. So I want to break down, this is a real client that recently purchased a $350,000 price home, which is great because that's roughly the average sale price in the city of Kansas City. And on the screen, this is an example of closing costs. For this person, those closing costs worked out to about $7,300. Can you kind of explain what closing costs are comprised of?
There's several hands in the kitty as far as closing costs goes. So you've got, loan lender processing and underwriting, appraisal fee, credit report, all the third-party services, title company. They're conducting a closing. They're looking at the title to the new home. The county where you live in sometimes has a tax or recording fees. You're paying the first year of homeowners insurance up front, and you're also establishing an escrow account for payments for future tax and insurance payments. So you've got probably 5 hands in the kitty. Everybody needs paid. Those are all paid at closing, and those can either be paid all or in part by the buyer or the seller. We do see some sellers willing to pay closing costs, and then sometimes we don't get that negotiated. So
which we'll get there. We have some tricks on how to get that covered. So in addition to closing costs, you also have your down payment. So on a $350,000 house, assuming they're conventional first-time home buyers, that's 3%. Which, do you know that off the top of your head? Because I have to use a calculator for that.
And no, ma'am.
3% of 350. We are mathematicians here, reporting live. 350 times 0.03 equals $10,500. So all in, your closing costs on this example, your cash to close, we would call it, would be roughly $18,000, give or take. So I know you're thinking $18,000, where the heck do I get $18,000? Right. Well, the good news is there are some ways to minimize the cash that you need to close. There are several programs that Aubrey at Flat Branch Home Loans offers, and a lot of lenders offer these as well. Can you kind of run us through the different options if you're looking for maybe some down payment assistance or some help with your closing costs?
Yeah, so down payment, affordability is a problem right now, and down payment, coming up with those funds, it definitely can be something that a lot of people need help with. I would say about probably 20 to 25% of clients utilize some type of down payment assistance program. So we'll just run through those. So the state, if you're buying, most states, whether it's Kansas or Missouri, they have some type of down payment assistance program. And generally, those are income-based. They have maximum purchase prices, which are pretty liberal. I don't know them off the top of my head, but I want to say they're probably in the $400,000 range. So if you're buying your first house and you're exceeding that, you maybe don't need down payment assistance. But for somebody they're income-based programs, and they're based on the family size. So it depends on how many people you have living with you or in your family. And they offer, Kansas and Missouri both have down payment assistance that basically covers your whole down payment. So then the borrower or the client would just be required to just pay their closing costs. So we also, as a Flat Branch proprietary program, we offer something called Flex Funds, and it's also for first-time home buyers. It's for single-family homes, and there is an income requirement or income restriction, but it's pretty liberal, and that gives somebody up to $4,000. 2% of the sales price or $4,000, whichever's less, to go towards their down payment or closing cost. And then we have another program that also allows them to finance if they were doing an FHA loan, finance their 3.5% down as a second mortgage. So essentially coming to the table with no money as far as down payment, and they're just financing and making a payment on that down payment. Yeah.
That's spicy. I like that. Yeah. Another option, if you don't want to pay a down payment, is a USDA loan. That's targeted towards like smaller towns, more like rural communities. Think like the Oak Groves of the world, the Lewisburgs of the world, the Kearneys of the world, Pleasant Hill, those kinds of areas. So in Kansas City, what's great is those are small towns, but all of them, you're still like 15, 20 minutes away from like
the metro.
Yeah, civilization. Yeah. So it's a great way to get a first house. Yeah, exactly. A first house and not have to pay a large down payment. And I wanted to add, all of these programs you're talking about, I think a lot of the clients that I've had that have used them have thought, well, there's no way I'd qualify for any of these. But like you mentioned, the income limits are pretty liberal. Like they're pretty high. Like they're higher incomes than you would expect, where you can still get assistance.
And for a family of 3 or 4, I want to say it's around 120,000. I mean, it's pretty liberal.
Yeah. So like I always tell people, if you think I don't qualify for those, just find out. And that's the great part, is when you reach out to a lender, they should be checking all this for you, even if you don't know to ask for it.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's very common, that people say, well, I want this kind of loan. Well, I tell people that there's a lot of programs they might not even be familiar with that we're going to introduce them to, and they might have 2 or 3 different loan options that we can look at, pros and cons of each. So there's sometimes multiple options for some people.
For sure. So those are kind of some ways to reduce your cash to close. Another way that we didn't touch on as much is negotiating for the sellers to pay some of your closing costs. Like Aubrey mentioned, it's happening some right now, not everywhere. There are pockets of Kansas City that just not going to happen. It's really competitive and sellers don't have to do that. But if you focus on certain areas, if you focus on houses that have been on the market more than a few days, then you have some negotiating power to have some of your closing costs covered as well. We actually recently had a client who bought in a USDA area, so they did not have to put a down payment down, and the sellers covered their closing costs. So they received a check back at closing for the earnest money that they had put down. So they went to the closing table with no money and walked away homeowners. So it's pretty fun.
It is awesome.
So monthly payment is the next big one. So how can you minimize your monthly payment? We've already talked about minimizing the cash you need on hand to close. How can we minimize how much you're having to pay each month on your house? A couple of ways. Number one's obvious, is put more down. Larger down payment, but we don't have a money tree. So like if we don't have a money tree, that's not possible. Talk to me about what an interest rate buy down is and how that can impact someone's monthly payment.
So there's 2 types of buy down. So you have a temporary buy down and then a permanent buy down. Now, a temporary buy down has to be paid by the seller. So you'd have to have a seller that's willing to pay this portion of your closing cost. But essentially, say your starting rate is a fixed rate. So that's a big thing that people want to make sure they're getting a fixed. But say the note rate is 7%. On a 2-1 buy down, what that does is the seller for the first 2 years is subsidizing a portion of your payment. And so for year 1, if your start rate was 7%, year 1, your first year is based at 5% interest. And so your payment's based on 5% for that first year. And it can drop your payment several $100s, depending on your sales price. And then at year 2, your rate goes up 1%, so now it's at 6. And at year 3, you resume that 7%. The premise of that program is we're trying to get people through this higher rate time, buy some time, give them some payment relief for the next 18 to 24 months. And then when rates come down, we can refinance. So that's the premise of that. A permanent buy down can be paid by the seller or the buyer. And basically you're paying points to obtain a lower rate, but that does increase your cash to close, although it does lower your payment. Then that's something we want to look at, like look at your return on investment. So if I pay $6,000 for a rate buy down and my payment is only going down $100, then say it's going down $100, that's 60 months I have to make break even on that cost that I've paid. So, we want to go over those scenarios with people, because I think a lot of times they think I want to buy the rate down, and it's not going to translate to as much in payment reduction as they might think. So it might not be a good use of money. It just depends. It depends on the scenario.
That temporary buy down makes a lot of sense for a lot of people right now.
We're doing a lot of those.
Yeah,
it's great.
It's really cool. And I've seen it go as high as like $500 or $600 a month in savings. So it's negotiable. That's something you negotiate when you're putting in a contract on a house. But those are some ways to keep your monthly costs down. So we've talked about how to keep your cash to close down, how to keep your monthly payment down. How do you even qualify for a loan? What are the steps to apply for a loan, and just general level qualifications? Credit score, which we do have a full video where we go deep on credit scores, but kind of touch on that, and debt to income ratio, what that is and how people can qualify.
Okay, so what we're going to look at is, obviously we're going to look at your credit. We're going to look at your employment history. So, and I think there's a lot of myths around that I have to be on my job 2 years, or I have to have 2 years in the same line of work. What we're looking for is really just consistency. Are there big gaps in job time? If you've been off 2 or 3 months, even up to 6 months, that is not a problem. So we're looking for, if you're a recent student and you graduated from college, all we need is you to be either on the job or have a contract to start a new job. You don't have to be employed quite yet. Teachers, maybe you're coming out of college and you're starting teaching in the fall. And we can still close with an upcoming teaching contract. And then we're looking at assets. Where are you coming up with your down payment? We're looking for other liabilities on bank statements. We're scouring those to see is there a car payment we're not aware of, or are you paying somebody else's rent that we're not aware of? So we're looking at total expenditures on debts, credit history, job time. But I always say 2 years is kind of the magic number in mortgage lending. 2 years address history, 2-year employment history, or 2 years schooling and employment history. But if it's not the same, that's totally fine. I feel like there's a lot of myths around. People think that employment history comes up a lot, that people are like, oh, I don't think I'm going to qualify because of this. And I'm like, yes, you actually do qualify right now.
Yeah.
If you're self-employed, we're going to be looking for tax returns. You don't always have to be self-employed for 2 years. So I think that's another myth that we run into quite often, that, that's something that, and there's other ways you can qualify too. So maybe you're self-employed, but you don't show enough on your income taxes and pay income tax based on that. But there's bank statement programs we can look at. There's a lot of other options we can look at when you're looking at qualification. I like to say that if there's a way we can get it done, we do.
Yeah, I always say that if Aubrey can't get it done, no one can. Yeah. So I always say call Aubrey.
I say that too.
Yes. So those are some creative ways if you don't initially qualify. Another thing that I think more people should consider is a cosigner. Yeah. If you have someone in your life that's willing to cosign for you, it doesn't really mean anything other than they're kind of backing you financially. Yeah. I even had to have a cosigner on my house that I live in now because I wasn't in real estate long enough. Like I'm self-employed, so my tax returns were kind of funky. So my mom cosigned for me, and I recently just got to drop her off, which was really exciting. Yeah. But do you see a lot of cosigners? We
see a lot of cosigners, and I always say it doesn't have to be, it's a temporary thing, just like you said, for you. It doesn't have anything negative about the person that's qualifying or not. Like, you completely qualified, you just didn't have enough you hadn't enough time in the industry at that point. And that's sometimes very common. So a non-occupant cosigner is a great opportunity to get somebody into a house that may not be able to qualify right now. And it doesn't have to be permanent. So they could, be a cosigner for 12 months, and then we could remove them from the loan. So it doesn't have to be a permanent thing. Yeah.
The only thing to watch for is if you do have a cosigner, make sure that they're not looking to purchase any of their own real estate in the next 12 months, because then it impacts their ability to qualify. But yeah, so advice to make this process easier. So buying a house can be stressful, especially in the way the market is in Kansas City right now. So a few things to keep in mind as you're considering if now's a good time for you to buy. Number one is don't shop at the maximum amount you qualify for. Do people often qualify for more than what is comfortable for them to spend, or they should be spending?
Very common. Very common to qualify for more than because if on $10,000, maybe you're taking that example we talked about, if you earn $10,000 and you take home, say $7,000, we could technically qualify for probably $3,500 to $4,000 in payment. I know I wouldn't be comfortable with that. So that's a pretty hefty payment for a take-home income of $7,000. Right. I wouldn't be comfortable with that. But it is very common that people do qualify for more than they intend to spend. But on the flip side, we have people that they want to stay around the 300 whatever price point. Say they're at 350, and they're looking at houses online that are 350, and then the reality is they might be paying more for that house than it's listed for. And so if they have a certain payment in mind, generally, I would want to start them on, and I'm sure you'll feel the same way, start them on the lower end when we're looking at houses.
Yes, for
lower end of their budget.
For sure. Another piece of advice that I have is don't get hung up on that 350, the big number. Think about your monthly costs. Think about what you can afford monthly and work backwards from there. So like, hey, Aubrey, I want to buy a house and I can only afford to spend $2,500 a month. What does that translate to in terms of sale price? Is a much better way to approach it than just kind of pulling a number out of the sky as like, I think 350 is my max.
Yeah. My initial consultation with any first-time home buyer is, you might be eligible for this, but what do you really want to spend per month? And I usually say, based off your current rent, you're paying $1,900 in rent. How does that feel for you? Does it feel like, are you strapped every month? Do you feel like there's more? Because of course, when you buy a house, you've got taxes and insurance you're going to be adding to. But if somebody's been consistently paying a decent amount in rent, I mean, it's very likely they'll feel comfortable going a little bit higher. But yeah, I think, and then, as you know, it can vary just because you qualify for this house, that payment, even if you're looking at $350,000 homes, the payment can vary a little bit just because of the tax calculation on each home. So we run numbers on all those scenarios. We want ultimately put people in payments they're comfortable with.
Yes, absolutely. Another thing you can do to make this process a little bit easier on you is to try to change your mindset that you're not buying your dream home right now. A common mistake I think first-time home buyers make is thinking about like school district when they don't even have kids yet and they're not close. And it's like, you're probably not going to be in that house for 8 years by the time you need a school district. So focus on the near future, focus on a wealth building tool rather than finding the prettiest house that you possibly can.
Your first house, I mean, most people are not, buying their first home is not their forever home, right? So it's just a matter of starting, like you said, starting to build equity, starting to build wealth. And then when you go to sell that home, then you're going to have equity that, if you keep renting, you're not going to have that at all. So
yeah, exactly. And then the last thing you can do to make this process a little bit easier with the craziness of the current market is focusing on houses that have been on the market more than a few days. And one of the big reasons for that is so you can negotiate things like closing costs, temporary interest rate buy down, and things like that. So there are ways that you can make this market a little more palatable, a little easier to navigate. Yes. Right. And people are buying homes every day. So if you are interested in finding out if this makes sense for you at all, Aubrey and I would be happy to help you. Slide into the old DMs and we'll hop on Zoom and have this exact same conversation, but directly with you. So can't wait. Until then, I'll be here on YouTube giving you the scoop on all things Kansas City. See you next time.